Hey you, and welcome. In this video, we will talk about stateful components in React. So let's dive right into it. We talked about props in the previous video, so let's do some practice. I'm going to create a new component called a button component, and I'm going to provide props like message or label and render that out on my screen, and then we'll create a state for that component. All right, so let's start by going to the File Explorer. In the components, I will right-click New File and type button.tsx. That should open my file for me. I will hide the Explorer. I'm doing Command/. Now I'll start writing my button component. I could copy-paste the code. However, it's good practice just to type it out, see if you know what's happening in each file. I will do export named export rather than default export. I'm going to continue using that. I do like the destructure pattern more than the default. And there we go, curlies. With that done, I will return a null. That's something called the boilerplate to get the component going. Boilerplate just meaning code that you have to write before you can actually write the code you need to write. This is just have to be there. So that's boilerplate. I will render this component out in app.tsx. So let's import that just like we did on for the paragraph. I can do that right under paragraph, destructure from. And this is usually how I write my imports when I'm writing them. I import, I can name it whatever for now, and then from dot slash, so in the quote, single quotes, dot slash, use the relative path, go to where I need to be, like button, semicolon to finish the line, and then I come back to import name, and then I try to do something with it. If it's default export, then I will just name it whatever I'd like. In this case, it's named, so I will destructure it out. I can do control space to get IntelliSense going before I even type anything if I don't know what's inside it, or I can just start typing and it will autocomplete for me anyways. So that's how I usually write my import statements. Write the whole line first, file path first on the right side, and then come back to destructuring or getting the default export. That way the IDE can help you better. Okay, so I have the button component under paragraph. I'm going to just render it out. Remember, to render a component, we have to use it as a JSX element. Diamond brackets on both sides. If it's a self-closing tag, which it is in this case, I will just leave it as is. All right, save that. And of course, nothing renders out because the component is returning null at the moment. Now, this component, I want to change it slightly. What I want to do is for the button, I want to make it not self-closing, but it will be something that has children. A children can be type of string, could be a type of another JSX. I can provide p tag inside it and say something. That's okay as well. So children can be anything, right? It's another JSX element, and a string is a valid JSX element as well. So I'll save that. Now, I am getting type errors because button doesn't really expect children. So let's see how we can type this in button.tsx. So I'll go over to that. I could click on the button.tsx at the top, or if you remember from the previous video, I use Command B to jump or go to the definition of the components. Just use that to save you some time. All right, so in button, I will do the same thing as I did for paragraph. I will destructure function component from React. And right after the name of the component, which is button, I'll do colon function component. Save that. So far, we do have a function component. However, there's still the error on the right-hand side. Same error that we're expecting children, which we did for in the app.tsx. We're passing children to button. However, that's not available in the TypeScript. So that's another thing we have to destructure from the React library called props with children. And in the diamond brackets, like we did for paragraph, we pass props with children and save that. Great. Now you may be wondering, well, I mean, you got the props with children working, but what if I want to pass more props like label or, I don't know, color or style? How do we do that? And the way to do that would be the same as paragraph. We start an interface, call that I button parentheses. I'll leave it empty because there's no object yet. And if I go to props with children line, I can do diamond brackets within diamond brackets and pass that. So it will be aware of props with children, but also be aware of your custom props that you may be passing to your component. All right, line's getting a little big. I will just make this a little bigger here. and go to the right side. Remember, I will either use destructure or I will just name it props. In this case, let's just call it, or actually, let's just do children destructure. And remember, children is now being passed, even though I didn't write it in my interface. That's coming from props with children. And children is something that is given to almost every component. It's just that you have to tell TypeScript that it will be passed down. All right, and I will just return children as is. Oh, actually you can't. I will do return parentheses, diamond brackets, and children in JSX JavaScript. So this is just me returning children as is. I am putting a fragment on top, which is not going to have any impact on the DOM, and save that. And you can see on the right hand side, something got rendered, which is what I was passing in app.tsx as a p tag. I could change this tag to h1, and that would change it. So that's how you pass children. Rather than make it self-closing, you could make it just like another HTML element, which has its own benefits, right? All right, so let's go back to button.tsx, and I want to also make this a stateful component. So what I want happening is I do have children here. Children will actually be string in my scenario. So I'll go back to app.tsx and change that really quickly. Perfect. Something is just a string. And if I go back to button.tsx, I can wrap this around a button that I get from HTML. So I'm using HTML tag here. Perfect. It converts that into button. Now I can make this component a stateful component by using a hook. So let me first write code with hook, show you how it works, and then let me explain what hooks are actually doing for us. So if I scroll to the right on line number 1, I will destructure use state. This is getting too long. I'm just going to have to break it down into multiple lines. There we go. Save that. Oh, okay. Yeah, my ID will automatically restart. Oh, never mind. I'll destructure use state from React library. Copy that over. Hooks usually start with the keyword use, lowercase, and then whatever their function may be. In this case, this is going to create a state for me in this function. And I can use this state function now inside the component. Remember, this is inside the component, not above it, not under it. Has to be used inside a component. So otherwise it will complain when you save it. So you will know that you're doing something wrong anyways. All right, next thing would be for use state, you can provide any kind of data type. It could be object, it could be an array, it could be Boolean, any of those. For now, I'll just work with true or false because I want to toggle the button, whether it's pressed in or pressed out, something like that. So by default, I will say false. And this use state, when it's called, it will return us a tuple. If this is the first time you're hearing the word tuple, do not be afraid of those. Let me show you what a tuple is. So in this case, I'll just name a variable called tuple, and it's an array type. And the first value would be key, I guess, and then second value would be value. And now I know that there's a string value and a string value on first index has a string value and the second index has string value. So instead of me saying const tuple, I could destructure it like I destructure an object, but instead an array with using the square brackets, and I can name the first one key and second one value. You can keep changing the item to whatever you'd like, and it will still consider that first item would be key, a string, and the second one would be a string as well. If I was to change the second one to say 0, you will see in value, it will show number. So tuple is just 2 values in an array that will always be 2, never less than 2, never more than 2. So it's tuple. And you can destructure it using the array destructure method. So that's what I'll do. I will name this state. First index of the use state would be the actual value. So I'll call this is toggled. With booleans, usually it's a good habit to get into where you write the boolean as a is something, is visible, is toggled, are available, something like that. So something that makes sense in a true or false sense. And then second, I'll put a comma right after, and the second index in the tuple is a function which you can call to make changes to this state. In this case, I'll say set is toggled. This is a convention. You can name these whatever you'd like. First tuple could be something, and then the second tuple could be another name. Perfectly fine. It's just a convention that everybody follows when we're writing React code. All right, so I've officially made our component a stateful component. We're just not using the state, so let's start using that. I will use the button onClick event. Remember, onClick in this case will be uppercase C camel case, since we're working on virtual DOM. And I will call an anonymous function and pass set is toggled. There we go. Call that, and I will pass it true or false. In this case, I want to toggle it. So let's use the old value is toggle. I will set is toggle to whatever the current value is, but the opposite of that value. So if it's false, set it to true. If it's true, set it to false. I do that by putting exclamation mark and is toggled, which is the value name. Save that, and that should start changing the state. And if I click the button right now, chances are it's changing the state, but I wouldn't know. Because I'm not really rendering anything to tell me that it's changing. So let's go back to our code, and I will start utilizing is toggled in a style. So style, double curlies, because we're starting style as a JSX object, and then inside that object we're passing an object, so it's double curlies to work with that. I will provide background color. And here I will use a tertiary operator or ternary operator, whatever they're called. Here I will use the ternary operator. I will pass is toggled as a boolean. So if it is toggled, then background color should be red. If it isn't toggled, background color should be black, right? Or actually, let's go yellow so I can read the text at least. Okay, so with that done, I'll save it. Right now, the background color is red. That means it is toggled. Or it's not toggled, I believe. If I click it, it changes the color. Click again, click again. So it toggles the component state. And that's what it is, a local state for the component that nobody else on the website knows except for this component itself. And I can render it many times. Let's create another button in app.tsx and call this else, something else. Right, and if I go back to it, notice that something is still red, but else is yellow. So you can toggle one, not the other, or both. It's up to you. Great, with that out of the way, let's quickly talk about what is use state doing for us, because it's a new pattern. It's very specific to React. What's happening here? So in React, there are lifecycle methods. Lifecycle of a web page or web component would be that it got mounted, then something changed about the component, so it updated, or it got unmounted. So there are a few lifecycle methods like that. There's a whole documentation on it that we can review as well. So what the hook allows us to do is hook into those elements and say that when this happens, do something for me. In this case, useState is creating a hook into React lifecycle to say, when my value changes, I'm going to trigger a few events which would either update this component or the next component, so on and so forth. And these hooks are very valuable because they are specific to a component. So if you make changes to a particular component state, they only update that component, not the whole website. It's not going to refresh your whole page. It only changes that component. So it makes it very fast. And you can optimize it even further by using other hooks on top of it as well. So that's about it for hooks. Hooks let you hook into React lifecycle methods and trigger events to make something happen. That's about it. All right, I'll see you all in the next video.